Next up is muscle tissue. So muscle tissue is specialized for contraction. And the muscle tissue produces all of our body movements, whether it's pushing food through our intestines or moving our blood or moving our body. There's 3 types of muscle tissue. Skeletal muscle tissue is mostly associated with our bones. That's why it's called skeletal muscle tissue. And it's mostly composed of just really long cells. So these long cells are called fibers because they're long and thin. And these cells are very, very long as the entire muscle is. Skeletal muscle tissue is voluntary, which means we consciously control it. We decide when it contracts and when it doesn't. Then there's smooth muscle tissue. Smooth muscle tissue contains small spindle-shaped cells. And the smooth muscle tissue is found in the walls of hollow organs, like the wall of our blood vessels, the wall of our intestines, the wall of the esophagus. And the smooth muscle tissue is involuntary. We don't consciously control it, right? We can't consciously make food travel through our intestines. And then there's cardiac muscle tissue. Cardiac muscle tissue is composed of cells called cardiocytes or myocardiocytes, and it's found exclusively in the heart. Cardiac muscle tissue is involuntary, like the smooth muscle, which means we can't consciously control it. Both cardiac and skeletal muscle tissue is striated, meaning when we look at it with a microscope, we can see these lines in it, and we call those striations. And these lines or these stripes or striations, these are actually highly organized proteins inside of the muscle tissue. And these are the contractible proteins that are going to move this tissue. So in cardiac and skeletal muscle, the proteins there are so organized that we can actually see them in these striations. Smooth muscle does not have these striations, so it does not have the same organization. And in terms of its contraction, it's weaker than the other 2. Last up is nervous tissue or neural tissue. This is found primarily in the brain, spinal cord, and nerves, but it's also embedded in small amounts in almost all of our organs. So like we have some in our skin for detecting pain and temperature, for example, but we have some in our heart because it tells our heart to beat faster or slower. There are 2 main cell types that we see in nervous tissue: neurons and neuroglia. Neurons are the larger cell. They're not as numerous. And the neurons are the ones that are involved with the high-speed electrical and chemical communication. The neuroglia, also called glial cells, are helper cells to the neurons. They're basically there to make sure that everything is perfect for the neurons. Do the neurons have enough water? Do they have enough sodium? Do they have enough glucose? Is there any garbage around the neuron that they need to clean up? They're like little slaves to the neuron. Going back to the neuron, when we look at a neuron, we can see a neuron has some distinct parts to it. It has a main area where most of its organelles are located, and that's called the cell body or soma. That's where the nucleus is. And then we have small branches coming off the cell body, and then a long branch coming off the cell body. The shorter branches coming off the cell body are called dendrites. And the job of the dendrite is to bring the signal into the neuron, so that they act like an antenna bringing a signal in. The long, thin extension is called an axon, and the axon is acting like electrical wiring, and it's carrying the signal away from the cell body of that neuron, and it's delivering that signal to another neuron or another cell. Brain and spinal cord tissue contains whole neurons in it, but if we were to look at a histological slide of a nerve, we would only see the axons, because nerves are an organ that is acting as like the electrical wiring of our body, and it's delivering electrical signals from one place to another. And so the axons are the ones delivering the electrical signals, so you find axons inside of a nerve.